Hi.
Hi.
We're back.
We back, baby. Hope everyone's doing so well wherever you are.
Me too.
Life is crazy, so we can all take a deep breath here together just to
wherever
deep
you
inhale.
are. Exhale.
Honestly,
welcome back to our podcast.
So needed. So needed in this crazy world.
Truly. Okay. So I have been feeling a lot of tension and a lot of pressure within myself because of lots of different things going on in my life, but definitely in regards to the thought of what do I want, and how do I make what I want happen? And I went on a walk yesterday with the goal of working through some of my shit. And I just kept thinking, why are you so rushed to be somewhere that you're not, essentially? You're rushed to work through this tension and get to some sort of better place. You're rushed for every project you're working on to be light years ahead of where it is. And I was just like, what you need to do is just soften and relax and be present. And that thought in and of itself allowed like what was really going on and was really panicking me to come to the surface. Like I couldn't beat myself up into a place of peace. I couldn't like pummel myself into peace.
I feel like we keep coming back to that too.
Yeah.
On this show and as individuals.
Absolutely. So I was thinking about the cliche journey and people having expectations of you versus you understanding and following your intuition and seeing where it takes you. And whether this sounds corny or not, I was watching this butterfly float and it was floating like right in front of me, and then it went in the street and there was this car coming and I was like, oh my God, the butterfly's gonna get hit by a car. And the car comes and it just glides over the windshield and over the car and then keeps floating along. It comes back in front of me and it's just on its path. And it was kind of all over the place and kind of wobbly and little things were coming at it and it was making its way. And I was just thinking about how it's so corny, but the butterfly is so similar to myself and my experience with learning how to trust my instincts. Because this butterfly doesn't necessarily have an end destination. It's going where it intuitively needs to go to get whatever it needs to get. And like those instincts are intrinsic to its life experience. And I was just thinking about myself and how every obstacle or every fear or every worry for myself not being able to access whatever I desire can be the quickest excuse for me not to trust my instincts and to start paying attention to what everybody else around me is doing and getting way too locked into that. And, oh, well, this thing is working for this person. What should I be doing? Should I be doing something like that? Or should I be adapting what I'm doing to be more accessible for more people, or thinking about what other people's opinions are of what I'm doing?
Yeah.
And considering, well, maybe they're right. Am I doing too much of this or too much of that? Am I not doing a good enough job of tapping into my creative instincts or of connecting with people and just like doubting everything about myself and about my abilities or just my desire. And it led me to call Casey and just be like, I've been on this path in my mind. I've noticed this tension that I'm carrying in my body and in my mind about everything I'm doing in my life right now.
Well, you didn't have to tell me that you were carrying tension because we're so like linked. And also too, we're doing this creative project together. So we have
tons of conversations.
So many conversations about where we're individually at, just in our personal lives, obviously as sisters, but then what we're feeling with what we're creating and putting out into the world and the messaging that we're sending and what feels right, what feels not right, And so there are honestly constant conversations happening along those lines. And I could tell for you in the last couple of weeks particularly has been some wind up, you know what I mean? And something that Carly is really good about at this phase in life, even just in the last year plus, I think that this has been something that a hill that you've died on, and I understand and appreciate it, is that good things take time.
Yeah.
And you really have learned through your experience, I think dating was your portal in learning that trying to rush anything or fit a square peg into a round hole has led you to a lot of self-betrayal.
Yeah.
And the way that you see forward to stick to your values, stick to your desires and needs while also like serving others properly and building the life that you want is by taking your time.
Totally.
And in my own way, I have this deep, deep, deep belief in divine timing and in everything happening perfectly. And that's my version of it. And I think I'm learning what you've learned now.
Yeah.
And I'm not through that yet.
Yeah.
I think I'm being battle tested as we speak.
Yeah.
So we both have this inherent understanding, like it's a knowing, a deep spiritual knowing that beautiful things take time, they take patience, and they are, I'm just going to say it, on God's timing and in his plan. At least that's how I feel. And I think you feel too, you know?
Totally. There's a difference between being inspired by what other people are doing and feeling threatened by it.
100%.
So I was realizing that I've just had my head on a swivel way too much instead of tapping back into like the source of where all of this started within me and within you, you know? And that always exists. It always has existed, but there's just been so much mental tension building because I've allowed myself to buy into this scarcity mindset where if somebody else is doing something around you and they're doing it well, it's like, oh my God, my time is now and it has to be immediately and I have to get to some vague endpoint as quick as possible. And how do I get there? And how do I get there? And push, pressure, pressure, pressure. And taking that step back and finally letting it sink in. What I know, what everybody else I think knows deep down in their body, like whenever you're able to really center yourself, the fact that nobody else's journey could ever interrupt your journey. It has nothing to do with your journey. It can if you allow yourself to feed off of each other. Yeah. Or collaborate with each other or just inspire each other. Or it can just intersect at various points.
But you're right, it also can interfere if you allow it
Exactly. And that's the only way that it can.
Yeah.
That's the only way that
exactly.
It can. What is meant for us cannot miss us unless we deliberately close the door on it over and over and over again, right? Even then, I still feel like it can't miss you because I feel like that's a lot of times part of everybody's path is sometimes turning their back on a good thing and then learning, oh, I needed that or whatever. But yeah, so then Casey came over and we were faced with this question of what are you guys trying to do with this podcast? And
by a very well-intentioned person.
Totally. No. It was perfect.
It was a genuine.
It was perfect.
Yeah,
we needed to hear it. We
was.
We needed, because we've been asked that question so many times. And I think it's brought up resentment at times because I think both of us have felt like, well, how am I supposed to answer that? You know, we didn't come into this thinking, okay, we're going to pick a lane and we're going to stick strictly to this lane. You know, this podcast is such a soul project for us. It's the culmination of so much life pain and suffering, but also learning and growth, and with the object of humanizing ourselves to ourselves and each other and other people that we meet that inspire us and teach us what it means to be resilient and teach us what it means to be a dynamic human being and to struggle and overcome and all of these things that make life seem beautiful to us. And so Casey and I are sitting there thinking about this question, what are you trying to do with your podcast? And all of these things keep coming up to the surface of like expectation, you know, what other people might have thought you would be doing or might want you to be doing or might expect you to be doing. And realizing that you constantly have choices to make about whether you're going to conform to those pressures or whether you're going to take the more liberating route. And it might be a hard route to take, but to decide that you're going to follow your instincts and do what lights you up, regardless of if anybody else enjoys it or not. Like, despite any of that, you know, like when you're starting a project or moving through life and thinking, what type of life do I want to live? How do I want to create it? How do I want to feel? I doubt that you're going to get to the place that you want to feel if you are constantly in response mode and in reactivity mode to the feedback that you're getting from everybody else all the time.
Mm-hmm. We were really talking, I think, so much around expectation and other people's perceptions of you. And I know that this is an ongoing conversation on this platform, but also between the two of us. And something that I really come to personally in recent months is Carly and I were talking about yesterday, when you're creating something, how important it is that the energy source of what you're creating is straight from your soul's desire and not other people's expectations or perceptions of what you were doing. Like, I think a lot of people thought when maybe they saw that I was starting a podcast that I would be not talking about certain things that we're talking about on here. And that's not because I'm not a deep person. I think people know that about me. And like, especially someone that knows me in person. But this is what I enjoy, and this is what I'm enjoying right now. And even just the process of letting yourself live outside the box that you've created for yourself has been, I think, is hard for all of us.
Yeah.
You know, because we're more often than not the first people to conform ourselves to other people's perceptions or our perception of what their perception may be about us, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, we don't even fully know what people are thinking. But the reality is that this show has been such a beautiful place to talk about some really real shit. And the reality is that not everyone is going to tap in for that. You know what I mean? Like, not everyone at the end of the day, like, it doesn't matter how passionate you are about it or how much truth telling you're providing in terms of like the people that you're bringing in and the platform that you're creating. Not everybody's ready, kind of, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think life is hard. It's a lot of hard work. Starting anything takes a lot of effort. It takes time. It takes dedicated thought and energy and effort. And so if you're going to invest that much of yourself into anything, the only way that it's going to be sustainable is if you love it.
Yeah.
And if it's honest and if it sits right with you.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think you and I keep coming back to the well about is like, is what we're doing sitting right?
Yeah. And
despite anything else.
Is it feeding us? Because at the end of the day, the labor that's going in, I'm talking about emotional labor.
Yeah.
Like, we have given of ourselves to create a community and like create a safe place where other people can feel into their own experiences.
Yeah.
And it's been so rewarding. Like, I've enjoyed every moment of it. It's been so scary. The funniest thing is that every time I'm most scared to put out an episode, people are always the most receptive to them.
Yeah.
The more vulnerable and like scary it feels, to be honest, the more they land with people.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this has been such a labor of love emotionally for both of us, and such a worthwhile one at that. And to continue to make sure that we're being poured into, I think anyone that's ever created anything and let it out into the world can understand when you're trying to grow something, the amount of heart space that it takes to do that. And the only way through all of the difficulties that come along that you're going to be able to sustain continuing is if it's feeding you. And it's really, really pouring into you. You know what I mean? And you hear, I was saying this to her yesterday when we were going to lunch. I was like, you know, you hear about these business owners that the company just came into your realm last year. And then you ask them, you know, when did this business start? And they're like, 2015.
Yeah.
And they've been at it grinding for 8-9 years. You know what I mean? And you're like, just the amount of love that took.
Yeah.
From that individual to continue to pour into something that
and belief
they believed in. Exactly.
Yeah.
Just the amount of belief that you have to have in yourself and in what you're creating is so immense that you have to just continue to come back to what feels right to you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
For sure. I think another thing that's been really interesting that's so in line with that is allowing yourself to really own who you are and what you want in this lifetime. Imposter syndrome is such a thing because I think it feels so awkward to admit that you want something because then it feels so on you to achieve that thing. And we definitely always think that people are paying more attention to us than they are. Like, at the end of the day, that not that many people are that zoned in and honed in on what you're doing. But at the same time, when you declare something openly that you want or declare who you are openly, it leaves you vulnerable to that thing failing or not working out or being judged or being rejected or being minimized in some sort of way. And that's terrifying. And at the same time, I don't believe that you will ever get what you want if you never fully step into owning it. And I don't
Agreed.
believe that you can ever fully be yourself if you don't step into showing it. And who you are might not be what other people would have expected or wanted or what they are drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
But the right people will be drawn to it and the right people will accept it and be excited about it. And even if that's only 2 people, who gives a shit? You just found your community.
Mm-hmm.
Real community where you can really belong, where you can feel seen and heard and loved and accepted. And that's such a beautiful thing in life. And like in a microcosm of our lives, that experience exists with us on this podcast because some people might only want to hear about young millennial life or lifestyle stuff that is fun and relatable and funny and silly. And that's a part of our lives. We walk around living our young millennial lives and we laugh hard as shit together all the time and we're dorky and that's a part of us.
Yeah.
And other people might want us to sit and talk about incarceration. And they might want to hear all the stories that we have to tell or all the stories of the community that, we've very much so reintegrated ourselves into. Because that is their link to us. And I completely understand that. You know? And at the same time, for us, it's about walking that path of trusting your instincts and always coming back to whether or not what we're doing with our lives is filling our cup and is creating an experience that makes us feel great and authentic and connected to our lives. And like we're building a life that we truly love. And so if any aspect of us sharing that doesn't land with anyone, that has to be okay. It just has to. And and I respect that because I don't walk around connecting to every single person I meet or wanting to follow their journey everywhere they go or feeling like everything everybody else is doing at all times fully resonates with me. But that doesn't mean that what they're doing is wrong in any sort of way.
No.
It's just their thing. And that's great because the right people will be drawn to them and they will find their crowd. And I honestly deeply respect anybody who's walking their path in a way that feels true to themselves. I know I'm getting into corny territory, but I have so much respect for that because it takes a lot of belief and dedication and vulnerability and discomfort to be doing that.
And I think that's one of the beautiful parts about, there's the idea you build your life by just continuing to move, trying things, putting one foot in front of the other and just continuing to explore what's in front of you. What piques your interest? What does this? What does that? But this experience, I think for both of us, this being my first time of ever really creating anything and putting anything out into the world, like we were talking yesterday about the idea of success and how the bar of success is actually really lame societally. You know what I mean? Like what is deemed successful societally is actually not really how we live our lives. Like Carly and I are not oohed and awed by shitty material things.
Shitty metrics.
Shitty metrics. Exactly.
The metrics of success that we see, like as much attention and validation as someone can possibly get, or like as much money as someone can possibly earn. These metrics are so praised and this is how we measure ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we look at each other and what we're doing, like our goals are so about like building community and honestly growing our heart space and feeling like we're contributing something meaningful while we're on this planet.
Yeah.
And those things are not included in the normal measurements of success.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
I know. It really does.
It sucks because if I were only focusing on those things, I would consider everything I'm doing right now a major success. So I'd be like, yes, I'm making it. I'm on my way.
Exactly.
But the pressure and the tension builds because you are holding yourself against really miserable metrics and measures of success. And it can really seep into something that is well-intentioned and that has a soul and that is from your soul and turn it into something else.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think we keep coming back to the well on and realizing like we need to reground ourselves into who we really are and walk that path step by step.
Yeah.
And just be confident about that no matter where we end up.
Yeah. Again, like we said, or like you said earlier, I think just coming back to the understanding myself that the only way something can enter into my sphere is if I let it to a certain extent, especially if we're talking about other people's perceptions or what they're doing or whatever it may be, you know, it's just kind of a choice of what you're going to put your energy towards. And you're exactly right. Like there's a lot of soul work going on here. And if we're concerned, not we're, but if any of us in this world are concerned about the numbers that kind of work does when it's just coming straight from your heart, you know, I think that you can get really tied up in knots of self-doubt and questioning what you're doing when you're letting things enter into your zone, you know?
Yeah. I've also realized how much over planning and overthinking what you're trying to do so much of the time is just you procrastinating actually starting something. And for me, as a recovering perfectionist, I can hold myself back so easily because I want everything that I start and do to be like perfectly executed or for it to have such a clear path and direction, and that I don't only know my first step, but I know my third step and my fifth step. Like I know exactly where I'm going and how I'm going to do it. And that's just not realistic. Because even if you think in your head that you have this great plan and you know your third step, your 10th step, things develop differently than you would have imagined once you actually start working on something. And the act of starting is the most important part. So like I'm having to learn how to simplify all of my ideas and my desires and my thoughts and just figure out, okay, what's that crossroads of where am I a little scared and uncomfortable and nervous, but I'm capable of this step. You know, I'm capable of doing this step. I don't have to think about all the things I'm not capable of yet and figure out how to develop everything about myself so that I know how to do all these things. I just have to do the thing that I'm capable of right now. And then learn by doing and figure out, even if there are certain things that I'm not capable of, figure out how to bring in somebody who is, or learn how to collaborate better and not take all the weight of everything on myself and think I need to be the one that executes X, Y, and Z or come up with this great idea or whatever. Like just the overthinking, the overplanning is such a technique of procrastination and really keeping yourself from getting your hands dirty and feeling awkward as fuck. And like we've talked about that so many times on this podcast.
Cringe
but like,
mound, baby.
It's such a practice for me. It's like I have to keep relearning that of you are not going to start everything as a master of your craft. You're probably not ever going to start anything in the scope of your entire life as an expert at anything. Like that's just not how it goes. And the rush to know more than I know and to be capable of more than I'm capable of in this current moment, or to be ahead of somebody else who's been on this road for a lot longer than me or something like that, you know? And that rat race, that rush, that tension just takes you so out of your heart space, but also just of the present moment. And like, it's like a painful way to live.
I've been thinking about that myself with how analytical I am with my emotions and with my feelings, and how that's actually a tactic to not feel your feelings by trying to analyze and understand them sometimes. I think it's really important as a human being that you self-reflect. But I have really, really been coming to this idea that spending too much time trying to understand something that just needs to be felt and experienced is a way to avoid feeling and experiencing it. And that's really the same as just getting your hands dirty and understanding that like you don't know. None of us, when we create something, know exactly where it's going. You can have hopes for it. You can have dreams for it. You can have hopes and dreams for yourself. And you can, if you have an end goal that you stick to and that you put your time and energy and love into, I believe any of us can get anywhere that we want to, you know? But I think a lot of times the creative process is such a flowing experience. And like I said earlier, you're growing through it too.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're growing, your hopes, dreams, and desires change sometimes. And so remaining kind of nimble with it and
the flexibility
of being like, well, this isn't necessarily where I thought it was going, but this project, this business, whatever, has a heart of its own and it's leading me here kind of. And I'm following it and I'm so inspired by, you know, what it's showing me. And I think that's been with this podcast particularly such an experience for me, at least, of just seeing how something can have a heart of its own and a life of its own. And I'm like an active, willing, loving participant in creating it, you know, with you and not judging that, but also understanding that beautiful things take time.
Yeah. Patience is such an important thing. And I think what you're talking about with the project taking on a little spirit of its own, a lot of that has to do with trying out different things, and certain things that you would have expected to feel right just don't.
Mm-hmm.
And then certain things that you might not have expected to feel so good feel great.
Yeah.
And so it starts to become something.
Yeah.
It starts to become a reflection of you and where your heart is, you know, and where your fulfillment lies and where your passion for life is, you know. And so much of what we've been talking about tonight also has to do with both of our spiritual journeys, I think, and how the spiritual aspects of life and that connection to intuition and all of our connections to each other, how relevant that part of life has been to this project, you know, and how much it feeds the direction that this project goes in.
Yeah.
Because to us, so much of spirituality has to do with service, and service keeps coming up, and then all these concepts keep coming up. We were talking last night about how recently we've kind of been reintroduced to God and the concept of God. And I will say the word God has felt uncomfortable for me to own.
Same.
Throughout my life.
If you listen to our last episode with our mom, you can hear how much we were born into deep spirituality and faith.
Yeah. God throughout my life has been really deeply linked with politics and with judgment on how other people live.
Yeah.
And the concept of power over others and domination of ideals and values, systems. And so much of what I've seen throughout the course of my life has been the image of God as someone who judges and punishes and says, okay, if you behave this way, I will love you. And if you behave that way, I will hate you and I will punish you forever. And that harsh depiction of God has made it really hard for me to feel safe buying into having a relationship with that entity called God. And recently, I think with the increase of our exposure to really harsh realities of life, like incarceration, like addiction, poverty, grief, things that are scary for a lot of people to look in the face, I have been reintroduced to people who describe God as a being that meets you in your lowest moment of suffering and gives you grace, you know, and that no matter where you're at on your journey, no matter what has happened, you are always welcome with God. And I have met a God that has inspired people to dedicate their entire lives to serving others without judgment, without self-righteousness, without preaching from a soapbox. I've seen people humbly relate to others in suffering and say, that could be me. I understand that what you're going through, as terrifying it is for me to look at, that could be me if I had had your life experiences.
Yeah.
And that's a God that I want to know and love. And it's been really liberating for me to recalibrate in my head what God can be and my ability to claim the God of my understanding and allow that to be real, regardless of any of the anger that you hear about,
Yeah,
who
like
is
the
God and what
dogma.
is right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's liberating. Yeah, I think it grounds me. It grounds me back to the journey that we're on of like the intention behind anything I'm doing being the most important part.
Yeah.
And that intention is so closely linked to like what I feel is a spiritual mission on this earth, or like a soulful mission on this earth. And that no matter the outcome of anything I'm doing at any time, if I can always go back to that intention,
Yeah.
and know confidently that I'm carrying that out with my value system intact, that to me is a success.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, like, what is the goal of the podcast? I think the goal of the podcast is for us to know that the things that inspire us, that show us what love means in life, and that reconnects us to like our spiritual knowing and confidence, being able to share and express those things, to me is the goal of the podcast.
Same.
So whether we're talking about incarceration every single week and that's not your thing, I totally understand it. That's okay.
Yeah.
If it's not a conversation that you're comfortable having, or if it's not a conversation that you feel deeply connected to at this point in your life, that's your path. Whether we're talking about grief, or whether we're talking about our lessons that we've learned in silly moments and in really hard moments, whatever it is that we're honing in on that just feels really right. If anything ever doesn't land with you, I respect that.
Me too.
I'm okay with it.
I second everything that you just said. And I think more than anything, putting yourself and your heart out into the world in anything that you do is not easy.
Mm-mm.
And I'm so proud of anybody
Totally
that is taking this step to pursue a curiosity or a passion or a dream or whatever it is. And I just feel so grounded in making sure that my intention and my energy behind what I'm putting out into the world feels fully aligned with me. And I'm so at peace with that not aligning with people.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what it comes down to is I'm just inspired by the thought of loving what I'm doing and being able to stand firm in that, and knowing that I'm putting out into the world loving energy and information, and like, this is so fucking cheesy to say, but just creating some kind of safe place for people or for us to come and to explore like the reality of life, good, bad, and indifferent. You know what I mean? Because that's just the reality of the situation, is that it's a mixed bag for everybody. Some people get a much tougher hand than others. And I'm so inspired by those that are vulnerable enough and willing enough to share that shit and own it.
Yeah.
And that's really where I'm at, is just continuing to hone in personally and as a duo to the intention behind what it is that I put out into the world. And that goes for this creative project and every other part of my life too.
Yeah.
So
it's so interesting because when we go into prison facilities and we talk to these people, there is a raw honesty and openness and vulnerability that exists there that is so gorgeous, that has taught us both so much.
Yeah.
People who have been through some really, really hard, intense life experiences. And they've also perpetuated, oftentimes, some really hard, harsh life experiences onto others. And that sits with them. And hearing people be willing to not just express what has hurt them in their lives, but be accountable for the ways that they have hurt others, and own the fact that them hurting others hurts themselves so much. There is a beauty to that level of truth that you can't help but to turn the mirror back on yourself and wonder, like, what are all the things about myself and how I'm living my life and how that might be affecting others that I've been ignoring because the stakes aren't as high for me?
Yeah.
Because I'm not in a place where it's kind of like do or die, like you kind of have to make the choice to be honest at some point when you're at such a low. when pretty much everything has been taken from you.
Yeah.
There's nowhere else to run, really. And I think having experienced conversations like that with these men and women who are incarcerated really inspires the way that we go about this podcast, because to us, it's so inspiring and it's so freeing to be able to rid yourself of all the shit that just gets congested within your body and that can fester when it's left unsaid. Those are the conversations we want to be having. And a lot of the times they're going to be about incarceration because we're so passionate about it. But other times they won't be, because we've met somebody who we just feel like, wow, like your life and the way that you're willing to express yourself about your life is so moving.
Yeah.
And like, I want to be a conduit for that story being told.
Yeah.
And that's just where we're at.
Indeed. It's very liberating.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice to start marching to the beat of your own drum.
It's a vibe.
It's a vibe.
I want everybody, would love for everybody to try something that they've wanted to.
And do it their way.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, love you, kiddo.
Love you. Thanks
Go
for being
team.
my partner.
Go team.
Go team. To anybody who's listening who wants to follow along with us, the gratitude is endless.
Absolutely. We love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.